All right, what do you say we start with a show of hands? This goes back, Darren.
Oh, wait. You didn't want that yet?
You come from a household run by a teacher. Know your place.
That's true.
Okay, let's take a roll, by the way. Urban?
Yeah.
How about a little more, professional here?
Yep.
Dani Sureck.
Present.
Okay. Pauly podcast him over here. Dani, how many on-air appearances does this make for the day?
3 and 4 hours.
Okay, here we go. Dani Sureck,
Let's
won't
go.
you guide our slate tonight? Here we go. Here's the question, show of hands. Were you or were you not familiar with the rule, as arcane as it was out of the depths of the rule book, thou shalt not throw a backward pass out of bounds with less than 2 minutes to go and a half?
I was unaware.
Unaware.
Yeah. I feel a lot better now. That makes me feel better, and I'm off to a good start here.
There you go.
On Cardinals Underground, brought to you by Pacific Office Automation, because when it happened in the moment, okay, I'm like, all right, are we expected to know that rule? Because we were perplexed up in the booth, minus Dave Pash, who is a master of the rule book. Okay, so I already have an anxiety going so many different ways because I'm not Pauly Pash. And then all of a sudden something like that comes out of nowhere. And I'm like, wait a minute. And I really would love to know if Dave Pash would have known in the moment what was going on with that ruling.
You have to admit it's a good rule.
Explain it to me exactly.
Well, here's what I would.
It prevents what?
In that circumstance, you're like, well, what would be the point of it? However, if you, let's say, especially in the last 2 minutes, you're trying to score and it's the last 2 minutes of a half and you're running down the field and you realize you don't have any timeouts and you're about to be tackled, but you can lateral the ball to a teammate. Oh, I missed him, and it goes flying out of bounds and the clock stops.
Even if you're past the line of scrimmage, you could
do
lateral it
backwards, so you're not throwing a forward pass, and if that happened, the clock would stop.
It's sort of the anti or the inverse of the holy roller.
Yes.
The Raiders did back in the day,
Good
right?
call.
Oh, no time on the clock. I'm about to get tackled. Oh, I'm fumbling the ball forward. Just keep kicking it forward like it's lacrosse or something.
But you know that rule.
And so, okay, now I get it. Now I get the genesis of it.
That's what I would assume would be the reason for it.
Interesting. Well, on the sideline, Dani, was there an awareness of what was going on at that moment at the end of the first half?
I didn't see any true confusion. I think I was just more trying to see what was happening on the field and seeing what the ruling was. It was confusing though.
They still had to huddle up as officials. We can talk about this rule all we want. It didn't seem like they knew it for sure either.
True. That's true. It did remind me of, I won't name the head coach, but there was a former head coach in Cardinals history where Dave Pash actually would come to the conclusion of what was going on with the officials on the field much quicker than the head coach. The coach would be sort of the old Vince Lombardi commercial, what the hell's going on out here? The whole thing. Well, this guy had a propensity for that moment, and Dave would actually come to the realization of what's happening in terms of the rules and regulations.
I love how you say you won't say, but then you said Dave Pash, so that only limits it to coaches since 2002.
Well, he's been around 24 years, so that
it's not
that
you have
involves
a little bit
5 different head coaches, I believe, if you go back. I think I'm not sure. What I am sure of is this is not good podcasting to get into the depths of the rule book. So What else are we going to talk about here on Cardinals Underground? How was the sideline, Dani? Were there any close calls, anybody barreling out of bounds? Did you have to go into a backpedal at any moment?
I did not,
Okay.
thankfully.
Good.
And thankfully it was dry. There was no rain. There was no snow. My toes did not go numb, which was a little surprising. I was wearing layers. I was taking all the precautions I could in my wool socks. I was wearing leggings under my pants, my beanie, my gloves, my massive Joe Namath coat, as General Manager Monty Austinfort called it, when I was wearing it getting onto the plane because it didn't fit in my suitcase, so I had to wear it in 80-degree weather in Phoenix getting onto the plane. So thankfully I was dry. I did not get run over. So I guess you can call it a successful day.
See, I wasn't really sure if you were going to go with that many layers because the night before, the local weather person I saw on Chicago TV called it, quote, outrageously warm for this time of year.
So here's the thing. Both things can be true, Paul.
True.
It can be outrageously warm that time of year in the
Chicago,
Windy City.
yeah.
and I can still be cold. Somebody on Twitter said that. Like somebody quote tweeted
Don't
me
get her
and
started.
said
boy.
like,
Hello.
it's actually not that cold in the Midwest. Like I'm in Cleveland, you don't need that coat. It's like, oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize that because you are not cold, I am not allowed to be cold. Thank you for that.
She was debating before the game whether to put on her leggings because.
And then I decided to.
There you go. That's smart.
And I'm glad I did.
It's about comfort. It's not about fashion.
I'm trying to learn that.
Well, the good news is if you would have been barreled into, it sounds like you had plenty of padding. You had as much padding on as the players themselves. So
Yes.
That's good. Okay. All right. What about that game? Did you sense, and let's get the assessment from the sideline reporter here, Darren. Was there or was there not a lack of energy in getting down 21-0? What was the pulse of the sideline?
It did feel like there wasn't the energy that we are used to seeing from this team. Now, you could see that in some senses. I feel like really in the defensive line, that was the position where you could most feel the emotion, at least most consistently, of the frustration and getting run over, which they were, giving up a season-high 250 rushing yards. There were some.
when the first play of the game rips the Cardinals front seven for 13 yards out of the gate, that was one of those ruh-roh moments right off the bat.
And the only other position group really was the offensive lineman, just kind of, I think it was more so working through some things, and you could kind of see some passion there. But a sideline as a whole, it didn't really feel like there was a ton of energy coming off of that.
It was down. It was either 14-0 or 21-0 when the cameras caught Budda Baker and Jonathan Ledbetter working the sideline pretty fiercely, being pretty vocal and letting guys know that's not the standard. We need more. And then they dialed it in from there, and they did fight back and make it a one-score game. But, some of the same issues cropped up that you've seen in past games. I don't know. Where do you want to start on that front?
Well, I mean, offensively, I think we know the shortcomings of this defense right now. And the Bears aren't a great offensive team. They were able to run the ball clearly, but it's not like they scored points. They didn't score a ton of points. But just offensively, it just there's nothing there right now with the wide receivers. They bracketed Trey McBride enough. I thought James Conner got off to a great start running the ball, and then they started making sure that wasn't going to be an issue anymore. And then he kind of came alive as a receiver. James Conner, I thought, had a great game in relatively limited touches given everything. But I know I asked this question of Drew Petzing. I don't know about you guys or how you felt about it. This was just my feel in real time, because Drew Petzing said there wasn't anything special that was done, but I felt like Kyler was in the pocket a lot. Now, again, I don't know if that was because the Bears were making sure he wasn't going to get outside and break up the play, or if he was intentionally trying to make sure he was staying there. But man, did it seem like he was in the pocket a lot, and unfortunately, that didn't play out to very much success.
This is not an offense that is built to play from behind, Paul. But they don't have the personnel. They don't have the star power. So when you're down 21-0, like it or not, you have to abandon the run game to a certain extent. Plus, you were already going up against the new #1 run defense in Chicago anyway. When you're having to rely on the pass game a little more, and you don't have that production from your wide receivers, that's going to be difficult. Trey McBride only having 31 receiving yards feels so low just because he's been so explosive for the last couple of weeks. He just is coming off his second 100-plus receiving yard game. The fact that your leading receiver was James Conner and you were getting Amari DiMercato in there, you had 4 receptions by your receivers, and it's not good enough. And when, again, you're playing from behind by 21 points and your wide receivers are not producing anything, I can understand somebody like rookie Michael Wilson is still being productive in the blocking game, but that's 2 straight games he has not had a single catch, and that's just not good enough when you don't have Hollywood Brown out there.
And it's not from a lack of targets, right? I mean, Michael Wilson, what did he get, 7 targets in the game? Somewhere close. And so, yeah, I mean, here's the thing. You're right, they're not built to come back. They are not built for the big play right now, especially without Hollywood Brown. You don't have that big play threat, the proven big play threat that's going to get you a 3 or 4 play drive. Even James Conner with that 16-yard catch and run for the Cardinals' first touchdown, that still capped an 8-play drive. Even Greg Dortch, actually 9-play drive, and then Greg Dortch, the 38-yard pass and run, which was phenomenal. That's still capped an 8-play, 80-yard drive. So you just don't have that big strike ability, especially when you're down. But to your question, Drew Petzing did say the Bears did, quote, a good job of keeping Kyler in the pocket. And it's one of those games where you're like, okay, did this game come down to which defense did a better job of keeping the opposing quarterback in the pocket? It certainly seemed that was a very key factor because Justin Fields ran for nearly 100 yards and had a 39-yard run where he ripped the Cardinals defense, and that was problematic from the start. Justin Fields, the ability to extend a play, and that's the first thing Jonathan Gannon told us post-game radio.
Yeah, and he brought it up in the post-game press conference too, the extending of the plays, and you can't have it. But except the issue though is you knew he was going to extend play. That's his game. That's what his game is based on.
That just tells me you don't have the personnel. Losing Jonathan Ledbetter mid-game with a now season-ending knee injury hurts. Your defensive line was intended at the start of the season to have a rotation, and now you've got LJ Collier, Carlos Watkins, Jonathan Ledbetter, Lecky Fotu, who have all missed games. That hurts when you're trying to have a rotation. It wasn't just the D-line, though. On that 39-yard scramble, Fields also had a 33-yard scramble. How many Cardinals defenders was he shaking off? The tackling. I know Fields is a big player, but the tackling from the defense as a whole. It's one thing to have the game plan and know what to expect from Fields, and it's another to not be able to not capitalize, but to execute the game plan.
And that's the one of the things you point to down the stretch of a non-playoff season is the want to. And if tackling and defense is a lot of just willingness, where is it? Once again, they corrected a lot of it, but where's it stand going into Philadelphia? Because guess what? You're going to get a lot of the same challenges, except a better offensive line, better weapons at running back, more explosive weapons to be sure at receiver than the Bears gave you, especially after DJ Moore hurt his ankle on the second snap of the game. He was never the same the rest of the way and wasn't even a factor.
And Cole Kmet had 4 catches for 107 yards and in the first half and was tearing them up, and then he got hurt and he left the game.
So I'm hoping that's remedied by the return of Garrett Williams. If indeed Garrett Williams is coming back and he's your nickel, now Jalen Thompson is more apt to be returned to be covering the tight end because you had to have Jalen Thompson serve as your nickel. Andre Sacheret got a lot of snaps, and I don't know who was assigned to the tight end. But it wasn't Jalen Thompson, at least not often enough.
Wasn't that an interesting defensive decision as you're putting in a safety in Andre Sacheret rather than sticking with another cornerback like a Keitrell Clark who still isn't getting snaps?
Or a former Cardinal, Marco Wilson.
How about that?
Yeah. So do you put that in the same category as a Myjai Sanders, Isaiah Simmons, DeAndre Hopkins? I mean, those are all, players that...
Marco being released, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they gave Marco Wilson every opportunity this year, and while we all saw it, and I think there was a lot of people that thought the change with Marco Wilson playing a lot of cornerback was going to happen sooner than it did, because he was struggling the entire time he was out there. And I was looking at the numbers. He actually had a pretty good year last year. Like his passing rating against last year was only like 77.1, which is pretty good. But this year it's like 137, and he's given up like 15 yards of reception, and that he gives up. And that's just, it wasn't going to work. He all the analytics and numbers say he was one of the worst in the league. And you can overcome that. I would think to at least get to the end of the season, but Marco's a different kind of dude. We all know that. And it didn't seem like it fit real right. And to be honest, the red flag got raised for me and I can't remember what game it was now, but when we were all going to talk to him in the locker room after he had a tough day and he wouldn't.
Oh, it was a home game.
It was a home game, but I can't remember who it was against.
Yeah. Might have been the Rams.
And he knew everybody was waiting to talk to him, and he just kind of walked away from everybody. That, you got to be in a different mind space than that.
And look, people ask me about where they're going and building this culture, and we've talked a lot about it, but there's no doubt in my mind that Jonathan Gannon and Monty Ossenfort are looking for players who are deadly serious about football. That's who they're looking for. And so if there's other stuff going on, ancillary stuff, if you don't quite have the professionalism or the maturity, and I'm not naming names here, I'm just saying that's the sort of player they're looking for. And so I think they did a real good job in identifying and drafting those players, bringing those players in. You just had your 11th different rookies start a game for the Arizona Cardinals, which, by the way, leads the NFL. And I fully continue that to happen again in this whole draft process in the offseason.
I do think it's interesting that Wilson hadn't played a defensive snap in a month.
Yep, 4 games.
Now, partially part of the reason that he was one of your starters is you didn't have a lot of other options. And I feel like it was the same to a certain extent with the rookie and Keitrell Clark. Now, Clark has a lot of upside and I think just really needs time to develop, but was a starter at the beginning of the year because you didn't have the depth that you were looking for. And then once the staff realized they liked Starling Thomas, you take away those snaps from Clark, not necessarily, in my mind, from the little we gather, that they don't think he has a future here. It was just maybe needs more time to develop. I'm curious, though, when you've got a veteran like Wilson, you're not playing for a month and you're only playing on special teams. What were you missing? What were you not improving on in practice? If it, was it more so off the field stuff? Was it on the field stuff? What was not improving? The fact that you weren't playing for a month.
I mean, for me, I don't think it had anything to do with practice. To me, you got 11 starts and you were bad, and eventually, they can say don't get me wrong. I think practice means a lot, and I think it means a lot to these coaches. But in the end, it still matters most what you do in games. And Marco Wilson was given this giant runway of 11 starts, and he did not perform.
He's in a contract year. And he was given.
Now, he's got 1 year left.
He does? Okay.
If somebody picks him up on waivers, he's under contract for next year.
So, look, he was, to me, it all falls under one umbrella with new decision makers in place. If you're the future is now. They're trying to figure out immediately who's part of the future. So, to Darren's point, he got 11 starts. Whatever you want to assess about practice, okay. But ultimately, you got to prove it in the game, and you got to have the production to show for it. And he didn't, I think, and I'm guessing that once they deemed that he wasn't part of the future, no more defensive snaps. Now they're moving on to Starling Thomas, Antonio Hamilton, even though he's the oldest guy on the defense. If I got that number right, he's older than the defensive coordinator, put it that way. But I think Antonio Hamilton quietly has had a pretty dang solid year. And right now is your best corner, your most reliable corner.
I would agree with that. And it's funny because you did mention the other guys. When you look at Marco was really close to Isaiah Simmons, who was really close to DeAndre Hopkins, and they all kind of have that same personality, and I would tend to agree. I don't know if that personality really fits.
Or priorities, maybe.
Yeah.
I will say, though, when you're talking about the culture, Paul, I do think coming off this performance, it's pretty telling that outside linebacker Dennis Gardeck, a leader, a captain, told Darren Urban postgame that this still feels like winning culture, that despite giving up 21 points in the first half to only give up 6 in the second, to be able to stay calm, execute the next play at hand, and stay focused says a lot about the culture that is being set here and not freaking out on the sideline, not getting caught up in things on the field, staying zoned in on what you need to be doing for your individual role. I think that says a lot coming off a 27-16 loss on the road for a captain to say that.
Well, and I would agree from the standpoint, and nobody wants to hear the moral victory stuff, but when it was 21-0,
oh yeah,
we've been around teams that would have ended 42-7.
I was just about to say the same thing. I mean, I was gripping. There's no doubt. When it was 21-0, middle of the second quarter.
Because you thought it was your fault as the play-by-play guy?
No, because where is this going?
Well, that's true.
Where is this? Is this going to be the
a preseason game for you to do?
Is this going to be this 60 burger that got Brandon Staley fired?
Yeah.
Right? Because in the past,
that's a good point.
In the past, that's the way a game had the potential to trend.
The fact that they had the ball down 1 score, 8 points. I mean, if you would have asked me that early in the game, I would there's no way that's going to happen.
It reminded me of the Niners game week 4 in Santa Clara. You got down 21-3, and you're fearing the worst against a juggernaut Niners team with Josh Dobbs at quarterback, and then they fought back. It's 21-16 late third quarter. So to your point, Dani, I think it does illustrate the culture and at least the fight, the refusal to give up, pack it in, which various NFL teams have done in a season where you're at 3 wins.
Again, the key becomes you get a little bit of space to show that out. This is that season to show that out. This is that season to say, well, we were down 21-0. We could have let it get to be, it could have been 49-0 or 42-7, and instead we had a chance to come back at the end. You get that this year. Next year, you don't get that. Next year, the second year, you don't get to keep saying, well, we fought back. No, you don't get to do that. This is your moment in time to get to that part of it. And then starting next season, you better have some of that figured out. Then if you get down 21-0, it doesn't matter what the final score is or what kind of fight you show. You just screwed up and got down 21-0, and that cost you.
You notice, though, and this is just me, because there's never a bad time for a hot take or a conspiracy theory, that when you've been at those pivotal points in the season, someone has lost their job. Because the only way to truly motivate in professional sports is job security. In this case, it's Marco Wilson.
Are you saying
I'm saying
partially
you
a
got-
scapegoat?
Not necessarily.
Well, no, Danny,
Or an example?
we just want people to be uncomfortable on this roster.
And to know that jobs are hanging in the balance, and there's a direct correlation between production and job security. And if you're not deemed part of the future, then guess what?
a good point.
We'll make that decision sooner than later. And if the other 52 guys on the active roster right now, if they take something from that, well, so be it. If we reinforce the message that this is a results-oriented business week to week, and there's still 2 games to go, and thou shalt bring it instead of packing it, then guess what? We'll reinforce that.
I'm pretty sure you had a similar sentiment in Minnesota when the Cardinals traded Isaiah Simmons. And I think you could find some correlations between the two of these, which we've talked about. Look, Marco Wilson was not playing well. And again, if you know he's not part of the future, if he's just going to sit on your bench, and this is the year where you're trying to figure out what pieces do you have, what pieces do you still need to both sides of favor, release him. Maybe he finds somewhere else the last 2 games of the season or ends up signing somewhere early in the offseason, but give some younger players that you maybe want to see, not necessarily at cornerback, right? But now you have a roster spot and you can elevate somebody else and get a better idea of who you have and what you still need.
So when it comes to the defense, when you talk about some of the names and the injuries and the releases, the trades, all of the above, think of how the personnel has evolved on the defensive side of the ball over the course of this season. So you're now, to Danny's point, you're missing your top 4 defensive linemen going back to day 1. You're on your 3rd different starting Mike linebacker. You have an undrafted rookie playing corner along with Antonio Hamilton and Starling Thomas. So it's a process when it's 30 minutes before kickoff, and we've seen every single practice of this team over the years that we're allowed to see, and I'm literally writing down, okay, wait, who's 44 again? And I'm writing down on my board, oh, it's 58. See, I screwed it up. 44 is Owen Pappa. Tyreek Maddox Williams. Literally writing that down 30 minutes before kickoff.
Because 44 is Owen Pappa.
Exactly.
Calvisi.
And then I'm like, okay, wait, Caden Davis is up.
17.
But he's not 39 like he was in the preseason. Now he's 17. These are things that are happening right before kickoff. So I don't know where the Cardinals are in number of players who have actually been in a game, but it's up there. So now, if you're Nick Ross, what do? Right? I mean, from week to week, you're trying to get this a sound scheme to go against some pretty potent offenses, and now you got the Eagles and Jalen Hurts. I mean, it's daunting to say the least.
The Eagles, Nick Sirianni actually acknowledged in his post-game presser after they beat the Giants in a game closer than people thought it was going to be in Philadelphia.
Where the fans were chanting, run the ball,
run the ball. He was saying run the ball, and I'm thinking, well, you're now about to face statistically the worst run defense in the league in the Cardinals because of the injuries and everything that they've gone through. I'll be interested to see how the Eagles attack this. I mean, the Bears were killing.
Are who we thought they were? No, I'm sorry. That was bad.
The Bear, you can catch that on Folk Tales. Thanks, Coach. It's a great episode.
By the way, I threw that out in the Big Red Rage. Amari DiMercato looked at me. Had no idea what I was talking
just the
about.
Comment?
Had never heard of Denny Green nor the Denny Green rant.
We're to that point in our lives.
I deserved it.
But the Bears were running over the Cardinals, and then for whatever reason, Justin Fields tried to throw a touchdown pass, and that's the one that Jalen Thompson intercepted. And I'm like, why would you do that?
There was another 3-and-out where they threw it twice, and then that third time they tried like a draw play, and it was 3-and-out, and you're like, okay, Cardinals will take it. If all of a sudden you're going to shun the run and go that route, because you realize that despite a confusing emphasis with a 2-score lead and going with the pass game, the Chicago Bears and actually helping turn it into a close game in the fourth quarter, which, of course, the locals were gripping about that, considering the Bears' propensity to blow double-digit leads in the fourth quarter at a historic rate. Anyway, you realize the last 5 games, the Cardinals have given up more than 400 total yards in 4 of those 5. So if you add them up, I went Craig Grialou, and I took the last 5 games, total yards by Cardinals opponents. It's over 2,000. It's 404 per game. And in terms of rush yards, you're giving up an average of 173 over the last 5 games.
It's not an excuse. I just think it's noticeable that the way the schedule has panned out, the Cardinals, who are still playing meaningful football, you are, again, showcasing what you can do, why you deserve to be here, why you deserve to continue to coach here. That's different than the meaningful football that a lot of these other teams, Arizona's playing this part of their schedule, is playing for in terms of a playoff push. That's what you have from Chicago, from Philly, from San Francisco, from Seattle. So I think to a certain point, when you're looking at not just coaching and game plan is not what I'm saying. I'm saying more when you look at the personnel and the injuries. You're just at a point where this defense is facing some really potent offenses, and you can really only do so much with who you have out on the field.
The other thing, too, and when you start talking about the schedule, that reminded me, too. Like, I did an update on where the Cardinals' 2 first-round picks are. And right now they're picking 2 for their own pick and 16, which is where the Texans' pick is.
Hey, we'll take it.
Obviously, those things can change, but when you talk about tiebreakers and who gets the higher pick, if teams are tied, the only tiebreaker that matters is opponent strength of schedule, which means when you play a more difficult schedule, then you're going to have a lower pick than anybody else you tie with. And that's what the Cardinals are faced with right now. In fact, I think right now, if I remember the numbers correctly, I believe there is no one with a higher opponent strength of schedule percentage than the Cardinals, and I think it's like 568 right now, which makes sense. Both the Rams and the Seahawks have been way better than people thought. They had the 49ers. They play those teams 6 times. They played a lot of other good teams. I mean, they're going to down the stretch. The Bears weren't, but they got the Eagles now. Then they have the Seahawks, who are probably going to be playing for a playoff spot in that last week. So, I mean, it's going to hurt them in terms of if they tie anybody with draft picks, but it does, again, not an excuse like Dani said, but it does explain something when you're talking about taking some haymakers here, because when you put together the fact you don't have the players and you have these really good teams, that usually doesn't end up well.
Yeah, and the NFC West earlier this year was taking some heat, right, for falling off. They might have 3 playoff teams this division. And you look at, a Rams and a Seahawks team. That's what I was talking at length last week about. To me, the offseason initiative is this division. You got to figure out what you're doing against Sean McVay and what you're going to do against Coach Double Rainbow in Seattle. He's got him back in contention, and maybe you can knock him out of the playoffs in Week 18. We'll see. That would be a joyous holiday season. There's no doubt about that. And then, of course, the 49ers, who still have the inside track on the NFC number 1 seed. But, now you get an Eagles team that had lost 3 in a row, beat the Giants, got a little drama in the end there. But
didn't look that good, though.
No, not at all. Not at all. I mean, and Jalen Hurts, had his moments. So we'll see. Will the inside knowledge of Jonathan Gannon, Nick Rallis, and company serve the Cardinals well in terms? Do they?
Will you get hit by a snowball, Paul?
Do they have enough personnel?
Yeah, Paul, you might want to steer clear of Nick Rallis and Jonathan Gannon on the sideline. I don't know what's going to be thrown their way in Philly.
Here's the thing: do those Eagles fans? Well, I'll just say it. The Eagles fans should have a newfound appreciation for what they had.
You know what? I think they do, but I think when they see JG and Rallis there, they're going to forget about that for the day, and then after we get back to Arizona, they're going to go back to realizing what they had in Gannon.
Do you think the Eagles fans will be well lubricated considering it's New Year's Eve and they don't have to work the next day?
Oof.
That could be a factor.
Is that a rhetorical question, Paul?
That could be a factor.
That's going to be me in the press box.
The passion level that's in
just
those
kidding,
stands.
Don't look at me. I'm just kidding, Darren. Golly, take a joke.
By the way, the whole, in the holidays, you talk about Eagles fans. Somebody just did a big article. I think it was an AP writer. It was December 1968. That was the infamous Bad Santa incident.
'68. I wasn't even born yet, Paul.
So no comment over here. And it revolved around how apparently the Eagles had started 0-8, and then they had won a couple of games. And the fans were mad about that because all the fans wanted O.J. Simpson to top the draft. So there was even tank talk back in 1968, apparently. So then they were mad, and the Eagles, I guess, were, and then all of a sudden they're out there, and I guess some guy some just ordinary fan dressed in a Santa suit decided to go ahead and make a spectacle out of himself, and it triggered all the Eagles fans who weren't in a festive mood, and he bore the brunt of that. And they said, I triple dog dare you, and they let him have it. And boom, they haven't been able to shake that sort of mark, that smirch on their reputation for a good 50 years.
If OJ had only been an Eagle.
That's right. So there you go. By the way, do you know what OJ's nickname was? Back in his playing days, I should specify.
The Juice?
That's a good one. He had another one among players. Headquarters. He had the largest melon you've ever seen. He was like a size. You think Bruce Bochy in his size 8.5? We're talking like size 9 hat size.
Really? Are we saying bigger than Bruce Bochy? I got a Bruce Bochy story to tell you. Not on there.
So what do you think about Gannon going? Because Gannon had his moment before the game with Matt Eberflus in Chicago, and he spoke very highly of him and how he considers him one of his biggest mentors. And he worked 3 years under him as a position coach when Eberflus was a DC for the Colts. But now you get Nick Sirianni, and they're still tight. Interesting to hear Jonathan Gannon tell the media that they still talk on a regular basis, and that he's gone through Sirianni for, some advice here or there on how to run things as a head coach. So, okay, they're tight, but could some of the institutional knowledge of how the Eagles go about things and the personnel, could it be enough of an advantage, competitive advantage for the Cardinals that they could somehow make this a holiday, miracle of sorts and go in there with a very depleted roster and give the Eagles a game who have been struggling in their own right in different ways?
I'm going to be a Darren Downer over here and say that I don't know that the insight knowledge is just going to be enough to really give the Cardinals any true advantage just from what we've seen personnel-wise and what the Eagles have on their roster. I do believe that when Gannon says this is just the next game, partially I believe that that's how he'll feel maybe once the whistle blows, but I don't believe that this is not any extra motivation during the week or having any extra juice to him, which is hard to imagine that he could have any more energy than he already has. I do think it'll be interesting to see Nick Rawlis, who has the persona. He puts his hoodie on. He really doesn't have any emotion. When you're on the field pregame and he walks past you, he is locked in on just what's directly in front of him. He's not chatting with other people. You don't really see a lot of emotion. So we saw a little bit of that when he talked to the media Tuesday about being back at the link and in front of the fans who are not very welcoming typically in Philly. I think it'll be interesting to see if we see any sort of emotion out of Rawlis, which we don't typically see one way or the other.
I did enjoy following that up. Somebody had asked him about going back to Philly, and he said, it's just another game. And then I came back to it later and kind of said, okay, I know it's easy. I know you believe that right now, sitting here in Tempe on a Tuesday. I keep thinking, I can think of a million players that have done this, but the most recent example is James Conner in Pittsburgh. And he sat up there early in the week and he said, if this was the year after I left Pittsburgh, blah, blah, blah. And then the first thing I asked him in the post-game press conference was, after he had this huge game, you said earlier in this week this game really didn't mean that much to you. And he cut me off and he's like, why you got to bring that up? And I have a feeling, especially if they win, obviously not if they lose, but if they win, Gannon's too smart. He'll never gloat over any of this. But you cannot tell me that winning this game would not be extra special to him. You can't.
Especially after what all the fans said about him after the Super Bowl.
Still do.
It's like going back to your high school reunion, right? You want to make your best showing.
I guess I didn't go to my high school reunion.
Oh, you did have one? I was going to say,
yeah,
are you even old enough to have a reunion?
I am. I didn't go.
But, he doesn't have his best roster by far.
Right.
Right? So, it's sort of like, you go to the high school reunion and your Lamborghini's in the shop. You can't drive it. You can't flex.
Yeah, that's
it's
a problem.
Tough. It's a tough deal, Not that I would really know. I just sort of envision. And I will say this much. when I tried to redeem myself, speaking to Nick Rallis in the press conference after last week, where it looked like he had the hoodie on and he was giving me the stare down.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Poorly phrased question.
It wasn't good.
I owned it. And I tried to come back, and so I just asked him about his knowledge of the run game by the Eagles, and then he gave a very lengthy, very detailed answer that, dare I say, we haven't heard all year long. So not that he didn't have the knowledge of other teams' run games, but he was willing to share it with the media this week. So if you really know exactly how that Eagles offense works, right down to every single block they're trying to execute, what do you think the odds are he can devise something, the X's and O's, even with a depleted roster? Try and stymie that and give them some headaches. He knows what, for example, Jason Kelce wants to do. What can you do as a defensive coordinator to make it extra difficult on the Eagles center, who's sort of the epicenter of everything they do?
I think you can have something like that. You can capture lightning in a bottle and have that all work out. I mean, I think you kind of saw that a little bit with the Raiders-Chiefs game over the weekend, where the Raiders probably had no business winning that game, especially what they did offensively, but they did so much defensively. Can it be the other way around? Can Kyler Murray in this offense do enough?
Going back to that Chiefs-Raiders, it's why if you want upsets in the NFL, look at the division games.
Yeah.
Because division opponents know each other so well.
Yeah, that's a good point. And this is not a division game.
No, but they know this team like a division opponent, I guess is my point.
You would, yes, I would.
Well, the coaches do, right? To a certain extent, you can only relay that to the players who haven't gone up against him so much.
And I do think, like going back to the Chiefs-Raiders game, I think the Raiders have some pretty good talent on defense, whereas, again, this is going to come back to the it's not about the X's and O's, it's about the Jimmies and Joes, and I just don't know if the Cardinals have enough Jimmies or Joes.
You know what the Raiders have? They have Max Crosby, that premier pass rusher, who's sort of like the whole Montez Sweat thing. I mean, once we dug into the numbers, the whole Montez Sweat effect and what he's done for that Bears defense is truly remarkable. I mean, the before and after, I wonder if, and I won't get into it all, other than to say that they were 23rd in total defense, 28th in scoring D, and since Montez Sweat showed up, they're 5th in total D and 7th in scoring defense. So I just wonder, we look at all the priorities in the offseason, and we can talk all we want about corner and offensive line and receiver, but edge rusher to me, I don't know if that guy exists in the top 5 and the top 3. I don't know if there's that guy this year, but I just get the feeling that, the Bears gave up a high second-round pick for Montez Sweat. Yeah, they paid him a lot of money. 4 years, 90-something, 62 guaranteed. But I think Ryan Poles, the GM, is feeling like it was worth it because they're getting instant return on investment.
The Cardinals just don't have that. It's not just the sack numbers. It's the pressures, the hurries, the quarterback hits. Cardinals have not been able to put really any opposing quarterback under true duress the last couple of weeks. We saw sparks of it at the start of the season, which kind of surprised us a little bit when you look at who is in that room. Maybe, again, now it's more about the quarterbacks you're facing this time of year or what the game plan is of how fast they're getting the ball out or who they're handing the ball off to. You're just not getting really anything from that pass rush. And to your point, Paul, considering the fact the Cardinals have so much draft capital this year and also next year, the player might not be in the draft that they need, but it might be with another team, and the Cardinals make a trade for a couple of picks and a player, and I would be okay with that at this point.
I mean, once upon a time, this team was in dire need, and they traded for Chandler Jones. How'd that work out? Right? Until the very last season, it worked out real well.
If you could get a guy like Chandler Jones at that point of his career for a second-round pick and a throwaway offensive lineman.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'll give you an example. Jalen Johnson, their free agent to be cornerback, who's had a heck of a season.
For the Eagles?
For the Bears, Jalen Johnson, 33.
Yeah.
Those 4 interceptions he's had this year have all come in the last 8 games. It's all come since Montez Sweat showed up. It's amazing how much better your corners are once you get a formidable pass rush, because Montez Sweat, before he showed up, the Bears ranked last in sacks and last in quarterback pressures. So it's just remarkable the before and after what he's done. And I'm just wondering if we saw Monty Ossenfort and Jonathan Gannon on that field, and I wonder if they're thinking to themselves, you look at the Bears as a case study, what getting that guy can do for your defense. That's all.
I don't think you're going to find any arguments here, Paul.
No, I'm not.
I
guess I'm just sort of talking to myself. Thought bubble.
No, and I do think that's interesting talking about the draft. It kind of feels like that might be assuming you have the right team to make a trade with and the right player. It seems like that might be one of your best options. Again, it's early to really go into details, but if we know that this staff wants to start young, and if you don't feel like one of these older veterans who's playing in a contract year or might have one more year in a contract you could pick up, if that's not something you want something that's going to be more long term. Maybe you don't want to do another draft pick and really have to develop a player. That could be your best bet, is getting somebody who is entering or is already in their prime and, giving up some of the draft capital you've collected.
Usually, the funny thing is usually those guys don't come available. The Montez Sweats of the league don't come available. I'm not really sure what Washington was doing there, to be honest, but because if they go and get themselves a quarterback, and they would have kept those pass rushers, because who was the other one they got rid of? Chase Young.
San Francisco.
Which, again, I know they both needed money. I get it, but
they got a third rounder for Chase Young.
It just amazes me the way San Francisco has the money to do all this.
Yeah, well, that's what happens when you have a last pick in the draft quarterback, right?
Yep.
Making no money.
They just did a story on that the other day. Somebody went a deep dive, so he's making less than $1 million a year.
I'm pretty sure there was a joke about, because Christian McCaffrey got everyone on offense like customized golf clubs, and I'm pretty sure there was a quote of Brock Purdy joking that he couldn't afford that even if he wanted to.
He has a roommate. Brock Purdy rooms with an offensive lineman.
Does.
Oh, Dani referenced it. Was that in a tweet?
I did. I tweeted out. I said, man, I hope Brock Purdy's roommate has some freshly baked cookies or something waiting for him, because 4 interceptions, yikes.
Yeah. But here's the thing. Even though he makes less than $1 million a year, he has endorsements, whatever that else. But, like, for example, when they made the run last year to the NFC Championship game, he got an extra 90 or 140 grand for that. And, if you go to the Super Bowl this year, and then if you go to the Pro Bowl, you get an extra 80 grand if you're the winning. These are all things that add up.
There's also a thing where overachieving
yes.
players,
NFLPA has a fund.
Has a fund, so overachieving players get a bunch of extra, not a bunch of extra money, but extra money.
Yeah. For him, I think he's tracking like $150K extra through that fund, which is the max you can get somehow. So, okay.
He's a starting quarterback for a really good team, and most of those guys are making $20, $30 million a year. So
yes.
I don't want to sit here and say he should be happy with an extra $500K.
So if the Bears get the number 1 pick, and as we wrap this up here, do you stick with Justin Fields if you're the Bears or not? Dani, you were the mastermind of 3 fantasy football teams.
I don't want to talk about it, Paul.
Oh, really?
Somebody,
the postseason didn't go so well. Ruh-roh.
Yeah,
Okay.
I lost. Last week, I lost in the first round of 2 of those leagues. Coincidentally, both of those opponents had Christian McCaffrey, who put up 40 points, rather.
Oh.
And then I made it to the second round in another league, and I ended up losing because I had Brock Purdy as my quarterback.
Oh, no.
So 49ers did not do me any favors in the postseason.
So wait a minute, you needed your roommate to bake you cookies.
Maybe I
is what
should
you
go
needed.
back on my statement that maybe being a GM is a little harder than it looks.
Yeah, interesting. Because DJ Moore had the opinion with the media going into the game where he said, you know what? Those 2 guys in college aren't better than Justin Fields. That was DJ Moore to the media, and he was talking about Drake May and Caleb Williams.
Well, and you can make that argument, and nobody knows for sure. That's the thing. The thing about when you talk about moving on to the quarterbacks is, DJ Moore says they're not better than Justin Fields. Well, he doesn't know. Nobody knows. That's part of the problem.
True.
But part of the equation, too, is take out who you're going to replace him with, at least in the short term, and you ask yourself, it's not just is Caleb Williams, let's say, better than Justin Fields? Part of the question you have to ask yourself is, Justin Fields the guy to take us to where we want to go? That's the ultimate question. It really shouldn't matter who you're replacing him with when you're asking that question. Because if you're playing is this next guy we're bringing in as good as this guy, you're doing it wrong.
You also reset the clock on the whole QB contract if you go for one of those rookies.
You do.
And I bring this up because as it stands right now, the Bears would pick number 1, the Arizona Cardinals number 2. And what happens to Kyler's cap number next year? Skyrockets to $50 million plus.
Which is what quarterbacks cost if they're good. Now, you're right. you could reset it. But again, if you reset it, you might be helping. Well, you're not even helping your cap because you're going to have to take a hit if you did something with Kyler. But much more importantly, if you keep Kyler and you have that second pick and you trade down to 7 and you get another first-round pick and another pick on top of that and maybe a body for somebody to move up to take that quarterback, that's a lot of pieces you can put around on a roster that we have just got through talking about needs a bunch of stuff.
Yeah. So anyway, my point is that the top 2 picks could be traded.
Yes.
Easily. Bears and Cardinals could stick with their guys. Or 2 pretty top-notch talented quarterbacks could be traded to make way for the 2 rookies. So very intriguing offseason in that regard, right? That's my point.
We should have some podcasts to talk about it.
Yeah. New Year's resolutions. Anything. Have you given it a lot of thought?
My New Year's resolution is to be nicer to Dani.
Good luck with that.
I see. Does that count the press box? When you got your game face on, does that count the press box, or are you exempt from that?
You're pretty nice to the press box.
I feel like I'm pretty nice in the press box.
Okay.
I might just be.
So what would you be referring to? In what circumstances are you not so nice?
In the podcast.
I see. Okay.
Waiting for press conferences to start.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. I think.
Darren is pretty nice, though. I will say he always puts up and takes down my suitcase on the plane, so I don't have to. Which I'm appreciative
Dani's resolution is to grow another 4 inches.
Well, when you figure that out, let me know. HGH for everyone on the house. We'll put it on Darren's tab. And that'll do it for this week's edition of Cardinals Underground, brought to you by Pacific Office Automation. Make mine a double.